for your time and energy. Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today is July 12th, 2025. I want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. Please subscribe. Also want to thank all the mothers who brought these people in this Zoom to the earth. And I'm dedicating it to mothers that gave us birth. And so I want to welcome Paul and Bill and Tom. We're celebrating Tom's book, Wisdom Weavers, which probes McLuhan and Harold Innis. We are all here now to invent new questions and new metaphors. There's been a lot said and written about Tom's book. I don't want to regurgitate all that. We can, but we want to just come up with some new things. So first of all, Marshall and Harold were influenced highly by their mothers. Who isn't? So we're going to go round robin with all of you. What was the impact your mother had on you in your own personal pursuits, exploring the hidden psychic effects of our inventions? And I'll start with my mother, Dolores Fialka, in Flint, Michigan. She gave birth to me in 1953, and she named me after the patron saints of mothers. That's Saint Gerard, but she spelled it Gerald because she wanted to, kind of like Innis's mom spelling his name Harold, Herald. My mom, Dolores Fialka, nurtured curiosity and the need to research, dig deep, and learn what is critical thinking and how can we really make it better. You know, how can we really get deeper into critical thinking? So, Bill, we'll start with you. What's the impact your mom had on you in exploring all these things we talk about?
She encouraged me to be creative. She made
Really?
a note. She made a note that when I was a little kid, that whenever I built things with blocks, I never built the same thing all over again. And she encouraged me to think that way.
What's her name?
June.
Thank you.
Kuhns.
Thank you so much. You're concise and articulate, my friend Bill. Paul, you're up.
Well, my mother, Matilda Levinson, had a great influence on my life. She was scathingly critical of everything I did. And so that taught me you have to really not be fazed by criticism. Actually, criticism, as Karl Popper pointed out, is very helpful in improving what you do. And I have to say, my mother would be very happy to see that I'm being labeled here as probably wrong, as you can see. She probably is the one who somehow figured out post-mortem how to get that
That's good, Paul. She worked with StreamYard and Zoom and said, dude, I want to get this label on my sons. But that's beautiful because that's Andy Warhol all the way. He says, don't worry about what people think of your art. Just keep making it. You know, I mean, Richard Schinkel, the great film critic, was at a cocktail party with my friend, and my friend goes, what do you think of McLuhan? He goes, fraud. And then he goes, well, semi-fraud. And then I did the research, and Schinkel was quoting McLuhan in his books 40 years ago. Same with Pauline Kael. They were dissing McLuhan. It's like, that's what you're supposed to do, is diss McLuhan. Okay, now, Tom, the same question, your mom and her impact on you.
Absolutely. Paradoxically, she was all unconditional love. At the same time, she was all discipline. So no matter what I did, that was probably wrong. She forgave me and she loved me. And at the same time, like Paul's mother, constantly kept me aligned with specific corrections that I needed to make in my living, and with a 100% like Mary Innis and like McLuhan's mother, strong work ethic. As you said with Warhol, keep moving, keep creating no matter what.
Yeah, I love that word work ethic. In my podcast, I sometimes ask people, where'd you get your work ethic? 90% go from my parents. I said, do you know in the third paragraph under work ethic in Wikipedia, it says, this could be a scam from consumer culture. Like whoever said we were supposed to work so hard, you know? So, I mean, this is what we get from our parents, because most of us are raised by parents who were really hardworking and dedicated. But let's keep it light and funny. Hold on one second, Paul. I just want to tell this one quote. Oscar Wilde, all women become like their mothers. That is their tragedy. No man does. That is his. Okay, go ahead, Paul.
I just want to say, as far as working hard, Tom's book, Wisdom Weavers, literally is the result of 50 years of hard work. I mean, maybe not every single day in each of those years, but I don't know any other book that's the result of that. So you really have an example of hard work there that paid off.
Yeah, and it's great, Tom. And I want to go to you now and just, you've talked about this in podcasts and in interviews, but summing up, what did Marshall mainly get from his mom, and what did Harold mainly get from his mom? Because we know Elsie, she was hanging out right here in Pasadena, California when she met Marshall, and she was, I can't even pronounce this word, a locutus. What is she? ELOCU.
Elocutionist.
Elocutionist. So if you look up that word etymologically, it breaks down to some amazing things. Rhetorical utterance, oratorical expression, to speak out. So that's what Marshall was doing. His whole career was emulating his mom to speak out. And that's like what T.S. Eliot said, poetry is outing your inner dialogue. So go ahead, Tom, sum up briefly what these two giants, wisdom weavers, got from their moms.
Absolutely. So as you're saying, Marshall's mother was an elocutionist. That means she was paid to travel and give talks, and she would often recite Browning, Shakespeare, and many of the other leading, what he would call grammarians or literary artists of the day. And so he had huge memory banks of stored poetry from the classics that came from his mother, as well as a kind of unstopping initiative to spout, to constantly speak and to perform. He was a performer as much as he was genuine, and he got a whole lot of that, not only from his mother. His father was a huge storyteller. The mother of Harold Innis was so propelled to be extremely hyper-disciplined because they were on a farm in a culture that had very little money, where if you had a crop fail, if you had just one kind of problem with severe weather or whatever, your whole crop could be wiped out, your whole career as a farmer could change. And so she taught him to work from sunset well beyond, from sunrise well beyond sunset, in doing not only farm chores, but learning how it worked, and in backing up everything you did with some kind of backup plan in case the crops failed. So she was a huge mentor and master for him in terms of life achievement, whereas he was somewhat alienated from his father at various points. To be fair to his father, he taught him some things, but his mother taught him everything.
Yeah. And if you read that article, Bob Logan of mine, he put it in Explorations, Can Art Stop War? It's about how matristic civilization like counters this bullshit thing that everybody thinks we're hardwired for violence. It's natural to fight. It's survival. And what Maria Gimbutas and Rian Eisler, Chalice and the Blade, and directly my friend Mary Jane Schultz taught Marshall feminism, that we're more hardwired to cooperate and nurture each other. That's what we're hardwired to do. And that's why I started on that mother theme. I think, the next thing I wanted to jump into was the fact that you talk about these two Canadian intellectuals together in the city of Toronto, which again is etymologically, indigenous language means meeting place. So I thought we would do something I start all my salons with, is take in one deep breath together on the count of 3. So 1, 2, 3. And now release. So that is what we're doing, is it's conspire. Conspire is to breathe together in a meeting place. We're on automatic pilot and we're forgetting that we're breathing automatically. So to consciously breathe is what I learned from Marshall, is you can consciously be aware of how these things we invent shape our behavior. We can consciously, and rather than just, automatically embrace everything that happens technologically and not question it. So this is this duality. You decided to do this as a 2, binaries, dialectic, Marshall. So I'm curious, the motive behind art. You did the art of writing a book. You guys are all involved in the art of researching and talking about how our inventions shape us. Great artist Mike Kelly said, art is making your problems other people's problems. Then there's this whole thing I've recently experienced, people saying, no, the Buddhists say suffering is the human condition. Bob Dylan says suffering's the human condition. Tom Waits nailed it. And here's one for you, Paul, since you're a musician. I like beautiful melodies telling me terrible things. The world is a hellish place, and bad writing is destroying the quality of our suffering. That's Waits being a great Manipian satirist, saying there's quality to suffering. I thought suffering was bad. And then Kurt Schwitter's a great artist. Every period must redeem itself because it suffers in itself alone. And then biggest influence by Marshall, besides James Joyce of the Symbolists, Louis Bersani was the poet critic. He just died. And talking about Mallarmé's poetry, says the very crisis which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition. So, we'll start with you, Tom. What about this duality? What's driving us as artists? More joy, more suffering? I know it's both and it depends, but why is there even a choice and me picking 2 words?
So I'm so glad you mentioned that in the context of the book, because when I was an undergrad, I was very impressionable. I was trying to put together Harvard's first concentration in communication, and people kept mentioning to me, Marshall McLuhan, what about him? And the duality was genius or gibberish. They thought he had something really unique, but could it be confirmed? And so my thesis was also duality, Innis and or McLuhan, because Innis leans more toward the suffering end of the spectrum that you're describing. But Marshall, as a converted Catholic, had this kind of ecstatic heaven in his future that he could aim toward. And he saw joy in many things, despite also understanding suffering and understanding why you need religion to counter suffering. But Innis consistently saw the problems that existed by virtue of imperialism, by virtue of monopoly, by virtue of what we call the digital divide now. In his age, it would have been class struggle and so forth. He had studied Marx and many economists. So he knew the suffering of the underclass from that standpoint, and he knew the economics that kept a divide going on throughout history. And he thought technology played a very important part in that. So I would say the duality of Innis and McLuhan itself, which is a very interesting bisociation. When you put the two of them together, their values together, their common ground, but their divisiveness together, you have quite an unusual polarity, but one that's uniquely creative as well.
Really great there, Tom. Bill, you're up. What is about this joy in suffering? Because you're a joyous guy. You seem to be positive. That's what's keeping you alive so long. But did you ever suffer? Is there any duality in this drive you got? And how's that relate to McLuhan and Innis?
Every joy has an underside. There are always different seasons. There are always changing. It goes from one to the other, and we go through the. We get sunshine, we get rain. We get days, we get nights. We get clear sailing, we get gloom. We get it all. And
yeah, but we don't have any control.
You really don't want one without the other because it's the dynamic tension of both that makes either one really work.
But Bill, what do you want to, be a Pollyanna like I am, like look for the bright side, or do you want to be a realist and go, there is things that are like, McLuhan's saying, are you an optimist or a pessimist? He says, I'm an apocalypse. We're fucked, man. And, he knew the root word of apocalypse means to reveal. So he was just Toto in The Wizard of Oz pulling the curtain back saying, hey, look what's happening in the background. But that's nice. But is that a little too Pollyanna? Because you don't strive to find the suffering, do you, Bill?
No. But it's just part of everything. You can't read a newspaper and feel good these days.
Well, behind what was the one of those great philosophers says, behind every fortune there's a crime.
Balzac said that.
Balzac, there you go, the king of quote sources. Thank you, Bill. What's the name of your book so people know?
The book of McLuhan quotations.
Yeah.
The McLuhan marshalling machine.
Yeah, you turned marshal into a verb.
Well, he is a verb.
Yeah, well, that's what Bucky Fuller said. I seem to be a verb.
To be a verb, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Paul, you're up. Thank you, Paul. You're up. You know what it's about. Go ahead.
Okay, so a couple of things. Apropos of suffering, I'm sure you're all familiar with Marshall's observation that behind every joke, there's a grievance. So jokes, make us happy, we laugh, but the root of the joke is a grievance, something that someone is annoyed, angry, unhappy about. Let me say something about research, since I think you said something about it. I think research is overrated. And what I mean by that is, yeah, you need to do research. Otherwise, you're just, totally spinning wheels without any evidence or substance. But far more important than the research is the thinking that an author gets out of the research and puts it all together. So, the research that Tom did with Wisdom Weavers, just the conception of the book, that's what makes it special. Or Bill's book, The Post-Industrial Prophets, which, by the way, was the first book about these media probing theorists that I read, and I'm still very impressed with it. It wasn't just the research that Bill did. It was the idea, the thinking that, hey, it's time that someone put together a book that talks about Innis, that talks about McLuhan, that talks about Mumford, that talks about Fuller, etc. Just as Tom did with his book on Innis and McLuhan.
Yeah. It's really good, man. You're a sales pitch man for these guys' books, man. Go out and buy them. They're probably they're either a nickel on Amazon and Bookfinder, or they're like $500 because they're so rare. It's like the epitome of Marshall getting all his shit from Finnegan's Wake. You can buy that book for $1 and you can buy it for $2 million. The same content is in the middle, but there is no content. Okay, go ahead, Paul. What were you going to add?
Well, I was going to say, apropos of the money that books cost. So I had read the Post-Industrial Prophets. I was teaching a course at the New School. I wanted to assign it to my students, but there was nowhere. This was before Amazon. I could get like even 5 or 10 copies of the book. And then I found out that the book was being used in a course at Fordham University. So years before I was teaching at Fordham University, I went into the bookstore at Fordham University and I was able to buy 10 copies of the book. And that's how I was able to get that book to my students.
Yay, Paul!
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
while
Paul,
we're singing each other's praises, Paul is modestly not saying that he's a McLuhan expert with books under his collar as well. And I used the Post-Industrial Prophets way back when too. We won't date it for Bill's sake, but so we have a love fest going on here and a lot of good books. Yeah,
and Sam Johnson nailed it. Anybody but a blockhead's writes for anything but money. But yeah, you make money selling books. But here's Mallarmé again. Look, and Marshall laid it down. And most of these media ecology people, I love everybody who does this, but they don't even want to get a probe Finnegan's Wake. Maybe they touch on the symbolists a little, but Marshall laid it out. He says, in order to understand me, you have to know everything Joyce and everything symbolist. Well, here's Mallarmé pitching you guys. Everything in the world exists to end in a book. How's that for being biased? Suspended out the window. Okay, so here we go. Embracing contradiction, which I learned from Frank Zappa. This Andre Mir review of Tom's book says, writing was metaphorical because his thinking was sharp-tongued. Okay, I learned from Marshall that all words are metaphorical. Then the question is, we'll start with you, Paul. What is the word literal a metaphor for?
That's very good. First of all, I have to point out here that the word literal and literally is an example of a word that is grossly overused in our world. People talk about something, being literally true, and all they really mean is that it's true. They don't grasp the fact that there is something in the word literal that just being true or anything when it's combined with. But I was so excited about telling you that I forgot your question.
That is fine. And that's exactly what I want, Paul, all you people, is tangents and anecdotes and stories, and going off the topic is what it's all about. The gap is where the action is. That's the resonating interval. It's basically, if all words are metaphorical, then the word literal is a metaphor for what?
Well, I think it's misused when it's a metaphor for things that are not literally true. In other words, that's what I was sort of getting at. The way it's used in our society is, somebody might say, I literally was at the bus stop, and the bus came by. Why are you saying literally at the bus stop? You were at the bus stop. What is literally afterwards? It like somehow makes it seem like you were more at the bus stop, but you're either at the bus stop or not at the bus stop.
Well,
So
that's embellishing. That's
Yeah.
what happened when humans invented spoken word. We fucked everything up. When we invented printed word, we ruined the world forever. But
Yeah.
we have to deal with the services and disservices. So I go on etymology online, 100 times a day to find out where words came from. Doesn't mean they haven't changed. My favorite comment is when they say of unknown origin. It's like every word is of unknown origin. It's just some guy in an office made it up, says, well, here's where it came from your great comment, Paul. Research is overrated, but it still can be important. So it's overrated and it can be important. So, Bill, you're up. What is literal a metaphor for?
I'm not sure it's a metaphor for anything, but I suspect it's one of those weasel words that people use when they want to deceive you. It's like what a magician does to distract you from what he's really doing. And there's a lot of language that is all about hiding deception. And literal may be one of those words that's mostly about hiding a deception. It's not really there for any reason other than to fool you. I kind of agree with Paul on that one.
Yeah, but I would disagree with both of you guys because basically all words are weasel words. When I interviewed this woman on my podcast once, she goes, "You're trying to trick me." I goes, "Every question I ask you is a trick." But I mean, I'm not maliciously trying to trick her, but she could interpret that because what you said, Bill, is a good example of creative accounting or cheating on your taxes. So which one is it? You can be so Tom, you're up. What's the word literal metaphor for?
Yeah, let's look at this from both a McLuhan-esque and an Innissian standpoint. From McLuhan's standpoint, obviously he's very religious and he's thinking the letter killeth, but the spirit bringeth life. And so from that perspective, literal is the kiss of death. It's the attempt to pin it down, as you quoted Mallarmé, to define is to destroy, to suggest is to create. So literal from that standpoint is that which overdefines and which delineates literally, in other words, through literacy. But for Innis, this is just the opposite. Innis loves evidence. He loves what's literally true rather than what's symbolically true or metaphorically true or imagistically true. He wants to see through long nights in the archives the letter, not the spirit. And so literally for him is evidence. And literally for McLuhan is, as I've said, the kiss of death.
Where did Marshall say, "Let her kill us, spirit give us life"? Do you know
the Bible said that, which he quoted frequently behind us.
That's really good. Yeah. You want to add something, Paul? Go ahead.
Yeah, I sort of asked Tom a question, because in terms of what Tom just said and his distinction between McLuhan and Innis, but nonetheless, notwithstanding what you said about Innis, he really went way beyond the literal and his research in those words when he came up with, his fundamental ideas that communications media basically, to some extent, determine what kind of society we're living in. That's not something that he found literally. That's something that he, jumped into, again, based on his own thought and imagination. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, that's the later Innis. The early Innis, though, so steeped in erudition by the Chicago School and others in Chicago where he got his doctorate, felt he had to prove everything by footnoting his footnotes and by archival research. And so what came to him, as it does to many geniuses in their later years, was the leap of faith to now I can philosophize because I don't have time left to footnote and document everything. So I just have to give the broad brushstrokes. But early in his life, he was a dirt empiricist, and he traveled everywhere to give firsthand evidence and get documents on location. not just to Ottawa and Toronto, but everywhere he could to build the strongest possible case. He was like a lawyer. He wanted evidence about his evidence.
Oh, I want to go back. That was really good, Paul, because I want Tom to suss this out too. There's two quotes that I would love you to process in this regard, Tom. One is Louis Buñuel. I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it. And the other one is Schopenhauer's, which I don't have right in front of me, but it's something like, you know, all truths go through three phases. Like the first one was, that's wrong. And the second one, well, okay, it could be. And then the third one was, that was evident all along. I knew that all along. And I mean, that's like, okay, you're learning how to have suspended judgment. But, you know, Marshall would, what I understand, you guys knew Marshall, I understood he would kind of argue, and then he'd go, oh, no, you're right. And the person would get pissed and goes, you're supposed to stand your ground and believe in what you're saying. And he's like, nah, I'm changing my mind now. So this word evident, Innis opposed evidence. Anything on those two quotes you can further suss out, Tom?
Let's start with Buñuel, because Innis said several things that actually supported what Buñuel said. He first of all said the university is about the quest for truth, which is very different. And at one point he said in frustration, if you hear anyone claiming to have the whole truth, run in the other direction. Run in the other direction. So
is that in your book, Tom?
I'm not so sure, but
wait a minute. You don't know what's in your book after 55 years. You should have every word memorized.
I don't think that quote is in there per se, but I think what's in there is because he was in the war, he really, really parted company with fundamentalism that he had been brought up with. And he severely reacted to all of the people who claimed religiously to have a dogma that was perfect and bulletproof. And he himself began to doubt more and more and more and more. So his feelings about religion and about any kind of absolutism began to show up in his writing about academia and about intellectual pursuit of truth as well. So I can tell you for sure that even though that quote may not be exactly that way in the book, there's a long documentation of his departure from fundamentalism toward probabilism. Things are probably true, but unless you can really empirically show from soup to nuts every part of them being true, you have to leave space for doubt.
Yeah. And before you go in the Schopenhauer, I think, Paul, what'd you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to add a true story about, which is very relevant to this discussion. Marshall frequently was a guest of Louis Forsdale, the seminar he was conducting at Columbia University. I wasn't there. I attended some of those seminars. I wasn't there at this particular one, but people were still buzzing with this true event that happened. McLuhan is at the seminar, and he's going on and on about, you know, the alphabet, which, as we know, in Gutenberg Galaxy, he paid a lot of attention to. And at some point in his talk, he said, you know, we wouldn't have a concept of nudity without the alphabet. And in the audience is Professor Merton, then and always the dean of sociology at Columbia University. And, according to the accounts that I heard, he stands up, he's like quaking with anger and says, Professor McLuhan, I can't believe you said that. I don't believe anything that you're talking about. I don't understand anything that you're saying. And Marshall stands up there with the twinkle in his eye, a big smile, and he says, oh, you didn't like that? Well, how about this? And he proceeds to do something completely different for half an hour.
You know, I mean, that's what I say when people, this one woman in our group, her mom says, and she's from our age, she goes, when I hear the word McLuhan, a red flag goes up. And I goes, that's what you're supposed to say. You know, come on. It's both ways. He's fucking your shit up and making you maybe rethink your safety zone. And, he's not trying to change your mind. I mean, that's actually something we want to go into. But Tom, back to you. That was a great story, Paul. The Schopenhauer, you know how the quote goes. I can't find it in front of me, but you know how it goes. The 3 stages of truth, or it's like, it's actually been updated by Robert Evans, the cute boy from Hollywood who produced all these great films. And the documentary on his movie says there's 3 ways: your way, my way, and the truth, and none of them are lying. So, this whole thing, Schopenhauer and the Evans, anything in that regard?
Yeah, the early McLuhan was very convinced that truth was poetic, and therefore it had something to do with perception rather than with knowledge. And he was immersed in Joyce and in many others, where any notion of truth would be multilingual, multi-level, multidimensional, all of the literary devices, symbolism, and so forth and so on. But after his conversion, if you talk to him privately, truth was a very simple matter. Just like if you're in Moscow, truth is determined by the party. If you're in steep Catholicism as a zealous convert, truth is already predefined. In the beginning is the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word is God. For him, that was the mega truth with a capital T, even though he could discourse about lowercase truth with his colleagues.
Really good. I wanted to touch on that. Half the truth is still a lot of a truth, a great McLuhan line. Because I've repeated this for years. I don't know exactly my source, but you guys should tell me, bullshit or true, that Woody Allen made Marshall say his question, "Do you mean my whole fallacy is wrong?" as a statement in Annie Hall. So if you hear Marshall say it, it's a statement, and he made him change it to a statement rather than a question. True or false, Paul?
Well, false as far as what Marshall said to me more than once, which was that Marshall, totally came up with that line. That basically Woody Allen had a script and Marshall came up with the idea of adding that in. Oh, you think my fallacy is all wrong? Not that he was the one who basically made it a question because it was originally a definite statement or vice versa.
No, it was a question. Yeah, but that's the research. Did Marshall use that line before Annie Hall? You mean my fallacy is wrong? Go ahead, Bill.
It was his favorite riposte to hecklers when he spoke. Somebody
pre Annie Hall?
That would be, pre Annie Hall.
Well, there you go. We got the proof right there, Paul. You're wrong. But you're saying to hecklers, Marshall would say it as a question.
Yes.
Yeah. So Woody supposedly made him change. It's like, Woody couldn't get Buñuel or Fellini, so his third choice was Marshall. Now, whenever I say that to people with confidence and they believe me, like I know what I'm talking about. I say the whole thing illustrates another great McLuhan line. A half a truth is still a lot of a truth. So whether Marshall's saying it as a statement or as a question, it's still a good statement to say. Tom, do you have any?
It was a howler. He always laughed from it. And Woody Allen was quite upset that his own crew laughed at Marshall McLuhan's line when they very seldom laughed at Woody Allen's line. Woody Allen forced him to go through 16 takes of that.
Oh, is there 16 takes? You know that?
Waiting for him to do the script line rather than his own line.
Do you know this other great fallacy myth is in this? You probably guys know this woman. She wrote a book on Marshall McLuhan. It's on my shelf. I forgot her name. It's sort of a cheesy little book. She said Marshall is holding his hands like this with 3 fingers down during that scene, and it's symbolizing something, like he's doing this code thing. Have you guys ever heard that one?
No.
I will send you, because you guys probably
a lot. The number 3 was magical for him.
That's what I'm saying.
When he got on the plane, he would insist on a seat that could be divided by 3.
That's what I'm saying. She knew that part, but she might have read into that, or it might be true Marshall was doing that. So, Tom, do you want to say anything about the Woody Allen fiasco I just brought up?
First, I want to corroborate what Paul and Bill are saying as the best knowledge that I have. I wasn't there at the time, but I was in Toronto when he came back. And I know he said he had a creative experience and that he pardoned this for being very pedestrian because he usually spoke in lofty aphorisms and so forth, but he used very conversational, straightforward language and saying he really liked being with Woody Allen and he really thought it was a good experience for him and that I should go see the movie.
Okay.
One quick thing here. I have there's a fourth point to the Schopenhauer story. You know, basically, if somebody comes up with an idea, talking to somebody else, first one says, no, that's wrong. You know, second thing is, oh, who knows, maybe it's right. You know, the third,
right.
you know, whatever. But there's a fourth part to it, which is, you know what? I actually came up with that. And you know, that basically, you know, not only did this phrase or thought was out there for a while, the person who's doubting it at first, when somebody else comes up with it, ends the conversation by saying, actually, I'm the one who came up with it. So
that is good. So, Paul, you're saying Schopenhauer came up with the fourth, or there's a new added fourth?
No, I'm adding that fourth.
No, that's good. See, that is, to me, Paul, you're the highbrow master of this salon, because this is my main thing. Marshall's a master at aphorisms. We know that. And he's a master at finding aphorisms. And I think what he taught me was the whole point of aphorisms is to take it one step further and reinvent it. Wallow in its wisdom, maybe get an insight or disagree with it, but take it farther. So, you know, Marshall taught us that. Our reach should exceed our grasp, or what is heaven for? Robert Browning. Then Marshall, our reach should exceed our grasp, or what is a metaphor? Most people don't even get that. I'll tell you, Bob Dobbs's was really good. Warhol said, in the future, everyone will have be famous for 15 minutes. Duh, that's the global theater. Bob said, in the future, everyone will have privacy for 15 minutes. So it's how you can take that further. You know, I think Harold Bloom is one of the best at knowing aphorisms and wisdom and knowledge from literature. And then how do you take it further? It's what Umberto Eco got from Newton. Stand on the shoulders of giants and look further. That's what I mean. Too much of this, like you're saying, research is overrated. Just repeating, imitating is not enough. It's reinventing. And it's like rooted, not retro. Or again, back to Harold Bloom saying, anxiety of influence, absorb your influence, then abandon them. So, you know, often I come onto these salons about Dylan or McLuhan, and I go, well, first of all, is McLuhan overrated? And everybody looks at me like, what do you mean? This whole thing's about McLuhan. So here's the woman. Do you guys know this book? Judith Fitzgerald.
Yes.
Great sketch on the cover.
Yeah.
So
you think that's legit, Tom, that her saying the 3 in Woody Allen's film with Marshall's fingers is legit, or is it just a guess?
Can't say for sure, but you know, ever since the popularity of Dan Brown and so forth, and many, many others, and Paul is dead. Paul Levinson would, of course, talk about in the Beatles, number nine. People are always looking for what's not there, and occasionally it is. It's kind of my summary of all of that. And I think what you're talking about creating new ideas, seeing things new and so forth, Arthur Koestler called bisociation. The genius of both Innis and McLuhan was that they could bisociate what had not been previously associated. And you may recall the somewhat apocryphal story of Gutenberg spilling flour off of a shelf onto the ground where a kid's play toy was, And the kid's block, when he put the block in the flour, created the impression of a letter. And from there, he got the idea of the printing press. Two things were put together that were previously not associated, and they were bisociated. So part of the genius of Innis and McLuhan is not just aphorism, all the literary devices and so forth. It's beginning to see two things in a different context, not previously associated in a popular way, and doing that again and again, and then bisociating even the bisociations, so that we have a complicated universe of strange bedfellows that nevertheless are creative wake-ups for us. And the interesting thing about Wisdom Weavers is it turns out to be a bisociation of Innis and McLuhan, and a discovery that the bisociation of Innis and McLuhan is what it took for us to have a Toronto school and still be talking about it.
Wow. Okay, Tom, you just knocked Paul off his throne. Sorry about that. No, so when I did the Buñuel quote, thank you so much. That was highly enlightening. When I did the Buñuel quote for the last 30 years to people, I go, I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it. 99% of people go, oh, that's great. I agree with that. And one guy finally goes, that's bullshit. If I'm going to seek something, it's because I want to find it. So I morphed it into a new question. We'll start with you, Bill. If the journey is more important than the destination, then why do we have to name or seek a destination?
I don't think destinations are written in stone. I think the journey is partly seeking out the right destination and finding out which fork in the road you need to take to get somewhere interesting. The journey should teach you what the destination should be.
Good, dude. Really good. Okay, Tom, your take on that.
When McLuhan says, I aim to explore, not explain,
Yeah.
I think he means that the exploration is as powerful and as engaging as the destination, if there is a destination.
Yeah.
And Innis also, in his latter years, got lost in the exploration. If he had a destination in some of his later writings, it's not clear. Some of them look like he maybe wanted to have a book. Others were idea files and so forth. He got lost in the ozone in a good way of constantly. He was reading several books concurrently, and it was as if the very quest for knowledge in the area that he was pursuing was just as important as coming to a conclusion. And that seemed to be true for Marshall in the way that he described the probe as well. The probe is important. The probe is nourishing. The probe leads to other probes. It's not the final destination that's the most important thing.
Yeah, really good. And Paul, you're up. But now, when I ask people, just really quick, when I ask people, is it more of this or more of that? And of course, it's both, and it depends. We already know that. But I was saying more, and this woman says, the word more doesn't function in your question. I was like, that's a good answer. Okay, Paul, your take on that.
The journey is more important than the destination to the extent that the destination is not known. And the less you know about the destination, the more you will learn as you're trying to get there. Should I take this road or that road? Should I turn right? How much time is left in terms of how we get to the destination? Do I have time to go down this possibility? And this again plays into the difference between certainty, which is what a lot of people strive for, and the more playful, ambiguous milieu that McLuhan and I think Innis in his later life were investigating. It's always much more fruitful when you're still out there looking for something. If you know exactly where you're going, I mean, you may need to get there for a reason, but there's almost zero learning in that situation.
Brilliant. I'm ambiguous about ambiguity. And and you know, it really boils down to the flaneurs. Hemingway, Picasso, Duchamp, they're all sitting in Paris, drinking coffee, slacking off, kicking back. And as Joyce saying, finding epiphanies in everydayness, you know, and spawning Walter Benjamin and psychogeography. Like you could just wander aimlessly and stub your toe and have an epiphany. That's Joyce, epiphanies in everydayness. So that's leading to Joyce. I'm always weirded out how so many McLuhanites don't even want to even attempt to read Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people once. They just go, oh, that's bullshit, gibberish. And it's all fine and dandy. That's all right. We pick and choose world. But Marshall, you know, really, I think broke the Finnegan's Wake code and realized that all times are happening now. That what basically Joyce did was he invented blotter acid and disguised it as a book. Or better yet, he invented what's after the internet and disguised it as a book. And Frank Zappa's a huge fan of James Joyce. And both Frank and James Joyce said, all at onceness. Same thing Marshall said. All times are happening now. We'll start with you, Paul. What in the heck does that mean? That's like Wyndham Lewis saying, we live in the moment and write a detailed history of the future. When I say that to people, they go, wow, that's cosmic. Yeah, all times are happening now seems to be true, but be here now. Ram Dass, your thoughts on all at onceness?
Well, I think the Gutenberg galaxy is an excellent example of exactly what you're talking about. So, you know, you can almost do a dissertation on that. And in fact, dissertations have been done. When he talks about the global village, obviously in 1962, even the most advanced electronic media were national, they were not global. You know, the Telstar satellite had been launched, but it didn't really do much other than the fact that it was interesting that there's a satellite flying around. And people have gotten correctly impressed with the fact that McLuhan was talking about a time in the 1960s which wouldn't be in existence for like another 40 or 50 years, namely the worldwide internet. And, you know, even on a more specific level, if you think about the titles of the chapters in the Gutenberg galaxy, what are those if not tweets? Yeah. You can't call it Twitter anymore. And if you think about the chapters themselves, they're blog posts. They have the same shape, the same construction as an average blog post. They're not formal academic chapters or any kind of chapters you would expect to find in a book. So McLuhan, in my view, and in Tom's view and Bill's view, and I'm sure in your view too, Jerry, McLuhan was tuned into the full extent of possibilities of human life, the human mind, the human brain. And I don't think he was clairvoyant. He didn't predict the future in that way, but his understanding of the way the mind worked enabled him literally to look into the future. And so it didn't matter whether it was 1962 or 2012.
Yeah, hold on, Bill. 1 second. That's Martha Graham said, great artists aren't ahead of their times. They are their times. So if all times are happening now, they are that. Go ahead, Bill.
In 1967, McLuhan was on a television show with Norman Mailer. And Mailer said to him at one point in the discussion, Marshall, everything you're saying right now could be true 100 years from now. I'm not so sure it's true right now. That's the way Marshall thought. His thought was all based on an analogy, and it was extremely elastic.
So elastic, what a word!
Day that stretched for 100, maybe 1,000 years.
That's a really good word.
It was way ahead of everything else.
Yeah, and I hate that when people go, he was ahead of his time. Well, I love it. I know what you're saying, but elasticity is better, and that's one of the great YouTube videos of all time, because Mailer is so hyped up and Marshall's like Mr. Cool. He's just talking and Mailer's like, it's like you showed you. But what Paul anticipated, and you're up next, Tom, but Paul anticipated what I wanted to say was Marshall got all his great probes from other people. He got the global village from Wyndham Lewis. He got the medium as the massage, or one of them message from Ashley Montague. You know, Donald Thiel sort of inventories it. But, you know, this is important because, Tom, you're up. This whole idea of all at onceness, your take on that, especially in regards to Innis also.
So again, if we go to the private world of McLuhan as the devout Catholic, the notion of eternity is central to his understanding of Teilhard de Chardin, his understanding of the Bible itself, his understanding of all time being cosmic or being divinely created, and therefore only the human being disconnects it into the past, present, and future. But within the world of eternal consciousness, it is all co-present. For Innis, there's a very different approach to time. He thinks we, in each culture and civilization, have a bias either toward time, and that bias toward time can lead us to the co-present notion of the past, present, and future if we're a deeply religious society, and he points to some that were, but it can also have a bias towards space. And when you have a bias towards space, you create empires that are not necessarily time-oriented, that are seeking to acquire other space, and that do not respect the traditions of time, because the acquisition of space overcomes other cultures and seeks to create new paradigms, new civilizations with dominant technologies. And so I think for Innis, time is closer to the traditional view, and yet he has a revolutionary view of the bias of time. Whereas for McLuhan, whatever he might say in public, he ultimately, and this was true on his deathbed, the priest who was with him on his deathbed confirmed that he sensed he was going to an eternal home. And therefore, for time, all time for him was within a larger cosmic egg or within the realm of creation.
That's the great Lord Buckley said, dig eternity. Dig it. But Tom, you have ESP. I can prove it right now. This is a fact. No. The next question is the time-space continuum. So that was beautiful intro. Thank you so much, Tom. Did you know I was going to do that, Tom?
Not consciously.
Oh, come on. Just go along with it. So, you know, it goes, you know, in your book, you delve into the time binding society and the space binding cultures that Innis talked about. And in our studies of Joyce, Decio, who's in Brazil, who's written a book about Finnegan's Wake and boating, sailing, you know, how appropriate is that, since Marshall was a sailor, wasn't he? He loved to sail.
Yes, he was.
On page,
years.
yeah, on page 12 of Finnegan's Wake, he says, we may see and hear nothing. And Frank Zappa said, nothing is what I want. So Decio claims that the eye is space and the ear is time. So, you know, Dante wanted to eliminate time and space and get to paradise. Maybe that's that eternity you're talking about. But here's this, I'm curious how we can delve into this difference between time and space and dividing it into senses. Is time more ear and is ear is time, space is eye. Can you just talk about that division a little, Tom? Is that go ahead?
Yeah. First, I'm sensitive to not dominating Bill here because I've had a lot more, pardon the pun, time than he has. And so I'll be brief and say that McLuhan very frequently worked with the ear and eye dichotomy. The eye was literacy, and the ear, of course, was radio and the surround. And with acoustic space, you begin to get into the ear as related to space and the way that we hear as spatial. And with the eye, you have a point of view, and with the ear for McLuhan, you have no point of view. You have infinite surround. And he talked of Manitoba, his home, as having that sense of eternal surround, eternal vistas without interruption and so forth. So that's just a beginning to McLuhan's sense of that. And he mentioned the eye sometimes being like a finger, moving back and forth. And so we have to break out of our conventional notion of the senses when we're hearing McLuhan. And I say hearing deliberately. Bill, over to you, because I've been a bit dominant.
Yeah, no, I'm going to go to Bill in a second, but I want to just interject that. That's some sort of aphorism about when you point at the moon, are you asking them to look at your finger or at the moon? So that pointing thing. Yeah, Bill, any thoughts on space is eye, time is ear?
In McLuhan, the dichotomy between eye and ear is basically between literacy and retribalizing. He used retribalizing as a metaphor for the entire gamut of post-linear and post-literate and post-broken or mechanized aspects of culture. It was a kind of grandiose way of describing the alternative to literacy and the alphabet and all of the effects of the alphabet and the printing press, which he did not particularly think had done humanity all that great a service. His PhD dissertation, Thomas Nash and the Learning of His Time, is 90% devoted to the history of the conflict between logic and analogy. Analogy being the two features of the trivium, rhetoric and grammar, versus dialectic, which he was determined to show that Western civilization had lost its bearings after the 16th century, when the forces of logic overtook the forces of analogy. And at the time, he blamed certain people like Peter Ramus and so on for the problem. The discovery of Innis, I think, was an extremely sharper insight for him, because suddenly he could blame something other than these writers. He could blame Gutenberg and the printing press. And he began to understand that the form of communication that leads to logic, such as the printing press and books with their line after line after line linearity and logical construction, have done more damage to the human mind, and particularly forced us into the left hemisphere of the human mind, rather than guided us to anything stable and sensible. And he wanted a world where as he put it in one letter, where intuitive man takes over from rational man.
What? That's in the Letters of Marshall McLuhan book? Who is that to?
That's a letter from to and I can't remember the guy's name.
But it's in the book?
It's in the book, yeah.
Yeah, I was complimenting Paul because he was the only one who got in the book out of us. How did you and Bill not get in the book, Letters to Marshall McLuhan? Tom and Bill.
I'm in there.
Oh, no, I mean, Bill is. But
Bill
Tom
is in the
and
book. Tom and I are not. Bill's
is good. But anyways, there's a lot more because, you guys brought up Clinton Ignatoff has uncovered so many unpublished McLuhan things. And I don't know why Michael doesn't give him permission to put these online. Do you guys know about these books? Pre-Mechanical Bride books? Clinton has notebooks of them. And in our salons once a week, he teaches us stuff Marshall said that is that's not on there. So anyways, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I just want to say something about ear versus eye. If you think about it, we have eyelids, but not earlids.
Yeah,
and
right.
Also, the world grows dark every night. It never grows totally silent. I mean, sometime during any time of day could be more or less quiet. So clearly, the ear is more in tune with the world, with everything that's going on, than the eye is. And that, I think, is reason enough to look at the ear and hearing as more primary than the eye and seeing.
Yeah, and then neuroscientists came to our group once and said sight is the most dominant sense. So it is this struggle, to figure out, are all five senses equally working? And is one more dominant? Of course, we know when you're reading a book, your eye might be more dominant, but you're still smelling the book. But Paul, I was going to get to you. I want to tell you that's a brilliant observation that I've never heard. The earth grows dark, but it doesn't grow silent. That's Thelonious Monk. Silence is the loudest sound in the universe. And it's like how important it is to understand that. But we can close our eyes and not see something. It can't leak through. But if you take your fingers and cover your earlids, the sound still sneaks through.
That's right. And by the way, that's why we have alarm clocks, because we could be sound asleep, but our ears, unless we're dead drunk or something, our ears are always working. They're always in touch. Our ears are in touch 24 hours a day. And our eyes, basically, you're lucky if you get, maybe 18, 19 hours out of them.
By the way, Marshall went through a period of interest in synesthesia, the connectivity of the senses. So although we tend to think of him as eye versus ear and other dichotomies, he would observe, for example, an ad where there's a juicy steak and your mouth waters.
Yeah.
So how is that connected? Or you have a deja vu, and instead of just pulling up the song that you're hearing, you remember the smell of the flowers at exactly that time.
Yeah.
So we can't compartmentalize them totally. It's a good teaching tool to talk about eye versus ear and so forth, but there's a part of him that understood that the senses were all created by the same creator from, again, his religious perspective, and that they were married at the hip in some ways, partially unknown to us, and in other ways known to us when we stop to think about it.
His definition of consciousness was the cumulative effect of all the senses together.
Yeah.
Being able to make sense of that, common sense from the Greek.
Mm-hmm.
Really good, Bill, because that's what I was going to say. I often ask people, what activity that humans do where all five senses are equally working? We'll just go round robin really quick. Paul, any guess? It's one activity humans do where all five are kind of equally working.
Well, swimming, if you keep your mouth open and you get a little water splashed in your mouth, you certainly can see when you're swimming, you can hear when you're swimming, your sense of touch is involved when you're swimming, but you usually don't taste the water, but sometimes you do.
Yeah. No, swimming's a good one. Go ahead, Bill. Any guess?
A walk in a park with an ice cream vendor.
Wait a minute. Is that what we're all going to do when this stupid salon ends? Walk in the park and eat some ice cream.
Absolutely.
Okay. That's a good one. And Tom.
So an Epicurean orgy.
Wait, what's the word Epicurean mean?
It actually goes back to the Greeks, right? And Epicurus and the desire to seek pleasure in all ways. And so an Epicurean orgy would delight all of the senses, and that was the attempt. Unlike just a sexual orgy, which Like
Yeah.
some senses, but not others.
But do you know the answer I get 99% is sex. And then the other ones I like are dancing and going to the bathroom. So that's, you guys brought up some new ones, man. But I want to go a little deeper into the split. Ear is time, eye is space. And I'm not doing it to split, but it's a jumping off point to get a little deeper here. And the Incas regarded time and space as one concept, called it Pancha, P-A-C-H-A. And I think that's what attracted Marshall to Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people, is that you're turning an eye experience into an ear experience. It's not like Ulysses. You can have famous actors read Ulysses and listen to it on the radio. But the Wake, you have to see every syllable and how the other people are mispronunciating them. You know, you're like, I wouldn't have said that way. You're more aware as a reader if you really learn how to read Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people. That's why Marshall said it's like tripping on acid. So I don't take acid, but my friends who read Finnegan's Wake out loud says it's like, go ahead, Paul. What are you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, if you think about outer space, if you think about the stars, we see the stars. We can't possibly hear the stars, right? I mean, we can't even possibly hear the sun or the moon, you know, so, you know, vision, even without a telescope, puts us in touch with things which are beyond our hearing. So, you know, vision is closely correlated to outer space, not just space down here. That's what we know, space. The telescope has no sound. It's just basically images.
Yeah, that's the Donald Thiel's first book. I held the poem. Marshall said, I held the telescope to my ear and I said, what a lovely smell. You know, but this is, I want to go a little deeper into this, especially Tom with your book and all, because this is Joyce. Shut your eyes and see. That's in Ulysses. That true vision can go through introspective and quiet, the quieting of the external senses. Can you ever quiet your external? I mean, that's what Chatbox told me. I'm believing that. He also has this Ulysses line, ineluctable modality of the visible. You know, is that is vision a more dominant sense? Then the classic is in Finnegan's Wake. Television kills telephony in Brothers Broil. Our eyes demand their turn. Let them be seen. What a line for Joyce to say. And, you know, for Marshall to sit there in Cambridge and start reading this gobbledygook going, what the heck is that? Like, you know, how am I going to do that? But, you know, we're fortunate to have Clinton Ignatoff because we did a big deep dive into this book, Laws of Media, you know, the new science. What a thing. You know, Marshall's trying to say, my work is important. I'm going to name it after Vico, the new science. When it isn't science, his art is science made true, as Jean Cocteau. So, Tom, here's what I wanted you to do. Just hear out the division of these two, which Clinton has designated, and jump off on that. And everybody else can too. Visual is point of view, orderly, reading with eyes, container, linear, speech, not what you see, what the world is with all your senses. Figure, left brain. Acoustic is simultaneous, resonance, not framing the world. All the senses, that's ground, right brain, resonance, language. Any more you want to add to that, you know, or suss out?
Yeah, first of all, within Wisdom Weavers, there is a great deal about figure ground, about left and right hemisphere, about all of the dichotomies that you've just mentioned. But let me backtrack a little to Joyce, because there is a quote from Joyce in Wisdom Weavers that I don't find in the other books about McLuhan. And it's important. And I think we need to know that part of the multi-sensual nature of Joyce was areas for rejoicing for McLuhan. He loved to quote almost ad nauseum ad absurdum parts of Joyce that had multi-sensual aspects to them. But here's one that he used in class that I haven't seen in writing other than in Wisdom Weavers. Gin a body, meat a body, coming through the rye. He's quoting a Robert Burns ditty in there, when a body meets a body, coming through the rye. It's a folk song of sorts, the way Auld Lang Syne becomes transferred into our folk literature from an actual poem. Gin a body for Joyce, meet a body coming through the rye. In McLuhan's literary criticism becomes wine, women, and song. You have the gin and the mead as the wine or the liquor. You have the body and body coming as the sexuality, the women, and it all is a song. So he gets out of it wine, women, and song. And in the meantime, we have the senses in interplay. We have the eroticism of the body, but we also have the coming through the rye, the visual of that, the perhaps smell of that, all entwined in one acoustical rhythm, which is called a song, that gives us a sense of ear play, even though it's written in a book. So he used that as an example of Joyce, appealing to pretty much all of the senses, but at the same time, creating a triple layer of meaning. And that triple layer of meaning is something that goes on in McLuhan himself. It's a tool when we look at his own writing. There may be a level of aphorism, metaphor, whatever symbol. Then there's something that maybe or maybe isn't literally supposed to be considered. And then there's usually something of the juxtaposition of opposites, or the bisociation, or the attempt to combine Napoleon with the 20th century or whatever that we later have to think about. So I think we find in just that one passage, not only the multisensory nature of Joyce that McLuhan delights in, but also a pattern for his own writing that he took on later.
Yeah, why don't you stop gobbledygook and start talking. What's the line he does in the album? The medium is massage. Like he takes a line out of Finnegan's Wake saying, quit talking gibberish and talk some straight turkey. But Tom, that was really good. You're saying that Joyce took this folk song or line from who was it again?
Robert Burns.
Robert Burns. And is that in Finnegan's Wake or Ulysses? Do you know?
I think it's in Wake, but
yeah.
Go to the book.
No, I'll look it up. I appreciate that. That was really helpful. And so I wanted Bill and Paul to weigh in if you want, and how Clinton taught me to distinguish between visual and acoustic, if you wanted to add anything else.
Well, I'll just add, as far as Joyce and McLuhan is concerned, one of the things that I think is very obvious, but should always be pointed out when we're talking about this, is in a very real sense, Joyce inspired Marshall and in effect taught him how to write, because what Joyce is writing is an incredible celebration of the alphabet and letters and what you can do with those letters. You put these letters together on a page, and wow, it's just an explosion in a positive sense in all possible ways, as you were just showing with the Robert Burns poem. I mean, every line in Joyce is like that. You can sit and read Finnegan's Wake, and it can take you 20 years because you spend so much time on every single phrase. That, in a nutshell, although McLuhan wasn't writing fiction, that's, I think, the way McLuhan was trying to convey what he understood about media and the various things that he was trying to communicate to the world.
Paul, brilliant, because I love to jab at the great Joyceans on the planet when I go, McLuhan was the only one who broke the Finnegan's Wake with his Menippean satire translation of it. And they go, that's bullshit. And I go, dude, you said it, because he learned to write language about language from Joyce. And Beckett nailed it, because, you know, I've had it out with Zizek about this. He thinks Beckett's better than Joyce, you know, and if they're both great, but, you know, it's like you're counterculturally correct if you say Beckett's better. And Beckett said it. Finnegan's Wake isn't a description of something. It is something. It's not a description of a dream or a psychedelic trip. It is that. It's like Dolly saying, I don't take drugs. I am drugs, you know. So, Bill, you want to add anything in that distinguishing between visual and acoustic?
The abrasion point between visual and acoustic is the most important thing to understand going into the era of the cybernetic age, according to McLuhan. He said that once, and that's always been an intriguing observation that I've never completely grasped.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody can say something.
No, you've taught me this, Bill. It's coming right back at you. It's that axle metaphor that Marshall said. The gap is where the action is, or the resonating interval. That's what's important.
It's a larger version of that.
Yeah, that's what I think it is. What you're asking, you know the answer. It's like you're asking the question and you already know it.
The play between the two.
The play between the two. Yeah. You know, Eno, you know, Ginkgo used Brian Eno to sell the book, the medium is the massage, or the medium is the message. And Eno just said a great quote. I'll find it, but it's something like, you know, play is what adults do. No, play is what kids do to learn, and blah blah blah. You can look it up, but it's a funny little thing, because basically music, you play music. And if you create a book like Finnegan's Wake, it's music, it's playful. But we think when we read a book, well, it can be funny and playful, but it's serious. It's saying something, you know. So the best thing I've always said about the Wake is there's no content in the Wake. And they just freak out. They just go, what do you mean there's no content in the... No, it's all about the act of reading. So let's keep going here, gentlemen, if we can, and get into determinism. You know, I think it's in Wikipedia. It says McLuhan was a light technological determinist. Yeah, with a big gob of Menippean satire. But he did say, you know, the telegraph caused the Civil War and the radio caused World War II. And people go, the radio didn't cause World War II. Hitler caused Radio 2 using the radio. No. And so, you know, Bob says a great line, cell phone caused 9/11. Well, you know, what caused the state we're in right now? And is it a technology? Did the economic breakdown there a couple of years ago, I was told it was caused by information speed up. And they go, no, it was caused by greed. And it was like, what? Are you the greed police? Everybody's greedy. So talk about determinism in the realm of McLuhan. Anybody want to start? Go ahead, Paul.
Well, first of all, I just have to add something about the interval. I've been saying for years that the interstice is where the action is. And I think, I mean, if you think about just like, you know, any two things and what goes on in between them, almost like in a Frankenstein, you know, way, that's where the action is. That's where life comes. Okay, media determinism. I'll tell you a true story. I sent Marshall a copy of my doctoral dissertation before I showed it to Neil Postman, who was my dissertation advisor. And I sent it up to Toronto. And Tina, my wife, and I went on vacation. It was August. Back in those days, of course, there were no smartphones or even cell phones. We got back 3 weeks later, and there was a message from Marshall, which I actually put up on my podcast, in which he says, "Hello, Paul. Paul, I'm reading your dissertation, very much enjoying it. I'd love to talk to you about it more." So I put that message up there. Anyone can listen to it. But when he said, "I'd love to talk to you about it," so of course I called him immediately. And the first thing he said to me is, "You know, you're very unfair to Innis and me when you say we're media determinists." He went on for about a good 20 minutes. I'm still not convinced, because indeed, Marshall correctly said that without the radio, there wouldn't have been an Adolf Hitler. I mean, the man would have existed, but basically Hitler hated the printed press. He thought they always got what he said wrong, because they were pointing out, who does this remind you of, that basically most of what he was saying were lies. But on the radio, Hitler could address the German people directly with no intermediaries. And thousands of the things that McLuhan said, not everything, were in effect that media were in one way or another responsible for what happened. And Tom can talk more about this. Innis was the one who invented that. When Innis was talking about the bias of communication, and when Innis was talking about communication and empire, basically he was saying that the mode of communication in any society determines what kind of society it is. So I never understood why McLuhan didn't want to be called a media determinist.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like, wouldn't it be great if Marshall could read his Wikipedia entry, whoever wrote that he's a light technological determinist. But I want to tell you, I found this book this morning. And look at the survey they do. Like, how about this for synchronicity? The parental determinism of Freud, the social economic determinism of Marx, the political determinism of Lenin, the peer pressure cultural determinism of Margaret Mead, the stimulus response determinism of B.F. Skinner. And then here's some McLuhan guys, the linguistic determinism of Safire and Worf. So, I mean, like, what? How did they know we were going to talk about technological determinism? And I'm going to go to you, Tom, now, but in one of my documents I printed out, it said, Innis's critics often labeled him a technological determinist, but he was a realist. So any thoughts on, does determinism work? I mean, it's a huge thing to figure out. It's Marshall's main thing, right? Isn't it the same thing as causality? Go ahead, Tom.
Right. So first of all, imagine a situation in which a person on a bus falls into someone else when the driver of the bus screeches on the brakes. And you think that the driver is at fault, and then you discover a pit bull ran in front of the driver. Yeah, right. Did the pit bull cause it, or did the owner of the pit bull who left the gate open? Or was it the whole society that created this kind of system of transportation, or the union that tried to get the driver to get more money, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? You've got a complicated world, and then was that all caused by the way in which the asphalt was constructed because he couldn't stop? You can go to levels of cause. So part of what McLuhan did was begin to talk about formal cause. Yeah. Because if you take Aristotle's definitions of the 4 levels of cause, you can shoehorn at least some of what I'm talking into 4 different kinds of cause. And McLuhan is more fascinated with formal cause that creates patterns, the design that causes things, than the efficient cause, the final cause, and so forth. That's one way of looking at his determinism, that within the realm of formal cause, the media not only affects what you see, but it also affects the entire environment. And so Innis was very much concerned with the technological impact. But when one of his students started to talk to him about being a determinist, he wrote on the student's paper, "I would not care to be called a determinist." That's in the book and the source and all of that. And Vincent Bladen, who was one of his colleagues, a fellow economist whom I interviewed, said that Innis would from time to time admit that ideas also were causative. So we come up with this complex world of levels of causation. And yes, you can build a case that both are determinist if you read only their books. But I call that a story within a story.
Yeah.
Because man bites dog is definitely a story, but dog bites man is not a story. And the fact that human beings create media is not sensational, so it doesn't get the headlines. So when 2 people come along who say the media creates man or recreates man or creates the culture or seems to or contributes to that contribution, that begins to be the spectacular part of what's being said. And that's what everybody picked up and ran with. They didn't realize that in his private world, McLuhan would say, no, God created all of this. He created the technology. He created the human beings. The technology doesn't create the human beings. You know, there was a first cause in Aristotle's sense, and that's what created everything. And Innis would also pull back and say that too. Geography created everything. He was an immense studied geographer. And when he wrote about the fur trade, the beavers, the cod fisheries, and so forth and so on, those were all caused pretty much by the lay of the land, the topography, where the rivers were. You can't have beavers without rivers. You can't have settlements without beavers creating an industry, and so forth and so on. So ultimately, what's behind the technology for Innis ultimately is nature. And the way that nature is created to work, that's what he learned on the farm. And for McLuhan, it's once again, very simply God. And the way in which God works is to create human beings who in turn create technology. But that's the outer story. And nobody's interested in that because it is dog bites man. That doesn't sell newspapers. But the medium is the message. The medium is the causative factor of everything. That sold a lot of newspapers and much more than that. And it sold a lot of people on a different way of looking.
Beautiful. I want to go to Bill, but I want to, before I forget this, Marshall said you can't write the great American novel. The front page of the newspaper is the great American novel. And I've updated it to the great American novel is the thumbnail on YouTube. McLuhan family reveals hidden secrets, you know, in a little box on YouTube. You don't even have to watch the video. It's all about reading that headline. And that's amazing how we're controlled by that now in the YouTube world, that is the great American novel in a lot of ways. So, Bill, we want you to throw in what you can about determinism and any thoughts on technological determinism or any of the other determinisms.
In 1966, Life magazine ran a piece on him. And he wrote to the editors of Life and he said, "You call me a determinist? The only determinism going on is the determinism of people who decide to ignore what's happening."
Yeah.
And they're the real determinists. They've determined that it's going to roll over them no matter what. And I think that's the best thing to be said about McLuhan and determinism.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Clinton also was saying it was in this book that Marshall wrote about T.S. Eliot or somebody way before in the 40s that never got published, that Marshall was saying art is a tool to understand and reveal reality, not to simply create it and fabricate it. And, you know, eventually Marshall said art is anything you can get away with. So rather than going into naming DTs, I'm curious if everything, one thing I've learned from Marshall is that everything humans invent have services and disservices. So maybe we can suss out, because I think all three of you live in Canada, is what? Oh, no, Paul. No, me and Paul are Americans, right?
That's right. As regrettable as that might seem in this day and age, but yes.
No, I'm sorry. It was a good balance, though. We have 2 Americans and 2 Canadians. And I mean, Marshall said, hey, I get America better because I'm one step removed. But hey, we're trying. Like,
Actually, Bill and I are both
Canada better. I have a great understanding of Canada because I'm on the other side of that dew line that Marshall was talking about.
Dude, distant early warning. Okay, go ahead, Tom. What were you going to say?
No, just to clarify, Bill and I both have a bicultural existence. I spent 7 years and many trips in Canada, but I'm American, and Bill goes back and forth. I'll let him speak for himself.
Oh, are you born in America? Were you born in America, Tom?
I was.
Oh, okay. Sorry. And Bill, you born in?
I'm a true born American. Yeah.
Oh no, we're all born in America.
Oh my God.
Sounds like a bad Bruce Springsteen song. Okay, so we're going to go into. You guys know this world of tariffs. So does tariffs, because it's currently a hot topic in regards to the U.S. and America. What are the services and disservices of tariffs? And especially, you know, implying it with McLuhan and Innis in mind. And I'm going to quote Innis, and we'll start with you, Tom. In 1930, he wrote this: the economic history of Canada has been dominated by the discrepancy between the center and the margin of Western civilization. Right. You know, we know his involvement in economics. Any thoughts on this? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, he sees Canada as marginal to the countries that created it, France and England. And so by virtue of that, it's not a center. And in fact, a huge part of Watson's biography about Innis, which is called Marginal Man, is about economics at the margin and people who are marginal to that causation we're talking about and so forth. Whereas McLuhan called Canada a borderline case, emphasizing that it was somewhat American, if not, 80%. And there was a contest going on when I last lived in Canada on Maclean's magazine. Maclean's magazine, of course, very Canadian magazine, and read frequently by the intelligentsia and so forth. And the contest was as Canadian as fill in the blank. And fourth place was Trillium's, and third place was Labatt's. We'd recognize those. Second was John Diefenbaker's French, as Canadian as John Diefenbaker's French. But first was as Canadian as is possible given the circumstances. That may seem funny, but it is a kind of brilliant comment on the fact that Canada has an identity that's somewhat defined by its quest for one, because American marketing and consumerism and so forth, and tariffs, as we look at that as a very current situation, largely determined a major aspect of some parts of the Canadian economy, but so too did its relationship with England and France historically, which for Innis was very important for him to define and to document in great detail. So in one sense, Canada is always marginal, and by virtue of that, it can suffer in the tariff game because it doesn't have the clout that Trump has and so forth. But in another sense, what Innis is always seeking for is balance. his bias was balance and stability. And tariffs are often destabilizing. So I think he would be pushing back.
Wow. Services and disservices of tariffs. Go ahead, Bill. Anything you want to contribute on that?
Well, the big disservice of a tariff is it's really it's a manipulative tool in disguise. It's almost like a mob action of demanding money from a store for protection. It's got a kind of underhanded, sleazy aspect to it, unless it's really justified by certain economic and political considerations. But these tariffs, I don't think, are justified, except as a means of wielding power.
Yeah. And
so
when
the services seem to be a lot stronger than the services.
Right. And when Tom brought up center without margins, any comment on that, Bill?
Yeah, I wanted to say something about what Tom was saying. I think Canada is already in an analogous way America's 51st state. We are so dependent on American culture and American thinking and American you name it. The soap we use, the booze we buy, it's more American than Canadian. In fact, the recent effort in Canada to buy Canadian and choose Canadian it's required a lot of searching for what is a better pellet to put in my dishwasher that's not made from an American factory, that kind of thing. So the Canadian-made industry is getting a big boost right now, but it's not very good at marketing itself. Not as good as the American stuff has been at marketing.
Really good, Bill. Thank you, Paul. Any comments on tariffs, center without margin?
Well, I think, first of all, the very notion of tariffs totally contradicts the global village. Because if we're all one big community, what is the sense in one part of that community levying a tax on another part of the community? And I also think it's inconsistent with centers are everywhere, margins are nowhere, because what's the sense of one center basically trying in any way to regulate another center, treating it as if it's somehow, a lesser, less relevant margin rather than a center. I'll also add, apropos of what Bill is saying and something on the other side of it, whatever status Canada may have in its relationship to the United States, I think for a long time, Canada has been the conscience of the United States. If, for example, we think back again to the 1960s, the United States is vehemently involved in the Vietnam War, an undeclared war, basically fighting a country that never attacked us. Well, the country to the north of us, our ally, was a place where people who in the United States didn't want to go serve in that military action, which was totally illegal, totally unconstitutional, totally unethical. That was a place that welcomed Americans. So I think Canada has played a crucial role in keeping America maybe a little less insane than it's been so many times in history.
Yeah, and the great McLuhan line is, you can't prove you're sane unless you have discharge papers from a mental hospital. My friend has them and goes, see, I'm sane. There's my discharge papers. And read the joke in the front of Dave Von Rock's book, and it really reinforces that. So, Paul, we'll start with you. What's the difference between art and science?
Well, that's a great question.
Yes, is there a difference?
Yeah, no, I was going to say there's not that much of a difference, because as far as science is concerned, and this gets back again to the overestimation of research, the best science has artistic elements in it. It's thinking out of the box. It's you observe a phenomenon. What is it? Maybe it can have this or that effect. I mean, even in medical science, for example, sometimes the best cures come from unexpected places. Someone discovers some herb has some property. Someone discovers this has that lethal effect on a dangerous bacteria or virus, etc., etc. Meanwhile, as far as art is concerned, it's not just all, I have a thought about this and I want to create something out there. There's a certain skill that's almost scientific in art, and that applies to whether it is visual art, whether it's acoustic art like music. In any kind of art, I think that there is an exactitude, a sense of understanding the properties of the medium that you are using, which we usually associate with science. So although obviously there are differences between the two, I think they have more in common than most people give them credit for.
Really good, Paul. That's Jean Cocteau said, art is science made clear. So, Bill, you're up. Any difference between art and science you want to
articulate? None at all. None at all. The greatest book that Marshall never finished, which I've been trying to put together pieces of for a long time, is called his 20th Century Baedeker, which is a study of the ways in which artists develop new modes of perception ahead of the sciences, and the deep raveling between the two, the fact that they're all knitted together at a perceptual and conceptual level in ways that we don't easily see.
Wait a minute. What's the name of that book again, Bill?
He called it his 20th Century Baedeker. Baedeker was
20th century what?
Baedeker, Baedeker. It was a set of travel guides. It was very popular in the 30s and 40s. And
who's it? Does Clinton have a Xerox of that on his shelf? Who has that?
Well, I don't know. I have to talk to Clinton.
This is like
all he had for it were notes. But as early as Cambridge, he was saying that the artists are better at discerning what's coming than the scientists are, and the scientists are slow in catching up with what the artists have already picked up. For example, the nonlinearity of cubism is very much related to some of the discoveries of quantum physics he figured.
Definitely. That's But what is Michael McLuhan just holding back on us? What is the deal here? Let's get these out there, man. You could say unfinished. I mean, really, Tom, I want to read a McLuhan quote to you about art and science. But first, I just want you to pipe in a little, Tom. Why do you think, is it because Michael doesn't want his dad's, unfinished stuff to go out there? Why wouldn't we get to read these?
I don't want to comment for Michael or about Michael. He's a good friend, and I don't know the answer. And so, out of respect, I'm an ethicist. Yeah. I don't want to color his reputation in any way.
No, that's fine. I totally understand, because anybody, if your sister was Marilyn Monroe, you're going to protect her, and you own her estate, But anyways, we hope we can read these someday. So, Tom, I want you to talk about art and science, but especially if you could react to this. This is McLuhan. When we push our paradigms back, we get history. When we push them forward, we get science. Is there a difference between art and science? And what is it?
Thank you very much. That's good. It reminds me of paradigms lost, paradigms regained, as something Marshall would have said as well. As a debater would say, I want to speak both for and against the proposition. Paul and you and Bill have made a good case for the interchangeability, or at least the interlinking, of art and science. And there can be and have been many people who seek to show that. For example, our friend Bob Logan points out how scientific Marshall is, which of course defies the conventional wisdom that the problem with Marshall is he doesn't substantiate, he doesn't footnote, he doesn't replicate in a lab, although he went through a period of experimentation with Carpenter. So for the most part, he seems very unscientific, and yet Bob shows in lots of ways how he is. And so I speak for the proposition that way, that art and science have some interchangeable elements and have the same source. And they both might be different names for truth, depending upon how you look at it. And Marshall was also very fond of quoting that the artist is the antenna of the race, Pound's quote, and so often that I quote it 2 or 3 times in the book myself. But I do need to speak for Innis, who's a traditionalist in the sense that he fights for the social sciences to be more scientific and claims that they're not. And that as a traditionalist brought up in that paradigm, and a very strong paradigm that persists to today, art may be grounded in science, it may reflect science, but unless something passes the test for replicability, for empirical virtue over time in many different cultures, unless it passes the test for veracity and for accuracy and for measurability and so forth and so on, it isn't truly science. And when you get into the world of trying to apply all of that to a painting and so forth, you can get into real trouble with other empiricists who, as has been said before, the dialecticians who came out of Ramus and so forth from McLuhan's standpoint are, and pardon my French, the enemy in terms of trying to reduce the spirit out of things into the letter. And so McLuhan, of course, was concerned about empiricists trying to change his department of English into what might be called word counters and into accountants with words who were trying to empiricize everything within English. It takes the life out of art, it takes the soul out of art. And so he would be very concerned about that kind of strict social sciences. Innis, on the other hand, was the protector of those rules, that if you can't see it, it doesn't exist unless you can come up with some device for measuring it and so forth, and even chided some members in his field for being reckless, more like rhetoricians, more like grammarians. So I think we can have a hard and cut reason for understanding the divisiveness in academe between the natural sciences, social sciences, and humanities. McLuhan goes for the laws of the humanities above the other laws for the most part. There are exceptions to that. And when we see that they're both mired in different academic traditions. But when we go to a higher view, we can understand why McLuhan is scientific and why Innis has some art to his own creation. He begins to design unique patterns that the artist would probably love, although they're intellectual patterns and not patterns of the senses. I hope that's helpful from the standpoint.
That was really helpful, Tom. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I just want to make another point about art and science being pretty much the same, very closely related at the very least. There's often a distinction made between alternate history, which is a kind of science fiction. You know, you change something in the past. What would the world have been like had John F. Kennedy not been assassinated? A lot of people make the distinction that seems reasonable between alternate history and history itself. But the truth of the matter is, although there are differences indeed, history itself, the so-called science of history, is also a fiction because it leaves out all kinds of things, because every historian who writes anything always has a point of view and emphasizes one thing and doesn't pay attention to another thing. And that's why different historians write different histories. So that, I think, is yet another prime example of the relationship of art and science, alternate history to history. They're basically a continuum. They're connected. They have a lot in common, maybe in many ways more in common than less in common. And by the way, I'd recommend a book on this. Jack Dan, himself a science fiction writer, has written an excellent book called A Fiction Writer's Guide to Alternate History. And he interviews a lot of people in that book, not me, but some of those people make similar points to what I just said.
Brilliant. Everything you guys have said today has really been important, and I really appreciate your time and energy. Here's Marshall in 69, Interior Landscape. James Joyce has solved numerous problems which science has not formulated as problems. That's like Tony Conrad saying, artists break rules that haven't even been made yet. And so here's another one, Chomsky. We learn more about ourselves from literature than from science. Now, that's very interesting because we're all POBs, print-oriented bastards, but we sure can talk for 2 hours. This has been amazing. No printed matter here, though we sourced it. Intertextuality, that's a new word I learned. We're all intertextuality experts. And so this is what, Paul, you said is Sun Ra, the great jazz shaman. He said, it's a mystery. It's not history. That's not the history. I want to tell my story. It's his story. So whoever Kissinger said a kiss of death, as Marshall called him. Kissinger says, if I win, I write the history books. Or one of those guys said that, McNamara, one of them said, if I win, I write the history books. So, very interesting. So we could kind of semi-close out with science, dude, Richard Feynman, I love him because you go to wiki quote for Richard Feynman, it's like 20 pages of saying, well, science isn't actually accurate, and I mean, he's one of the best. He found a note and he loved to use it. Nabokov, space is a swarming in the eyes and time is a singing in the ears. So, going back to being playful. And here's the other one I left out when you were saying the eardrums move when the eyes move. Did you know that? I couldn't believe that. I looked that up and it says it because no earlids, but do the eardrums move when the eye moves? And this is all being playful, but at the same time, as Frank Zappa says, I'm very serious about being not serious. And I think that's what both Marshall and Joyce taught us to, be playful. And here's the Eno quote. It just came out in his book. You know about Eno's movie, by the way, because it's the ultimate with Marshall. Every screening of the Eno documentary is different. They got a thing where it's edited, so every screening's different. That's how it should be. That's how art is, sort of saying, don't nail it down with history. Eno said, play is how children learn. Art is how adults play. So, this has really been an amazing, playful period. I wanted to kind of close out with this two things. Thornton Wilder said, art is confession. Art is the secret told, but art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. So the question is, what was Marshall and Innis really wanting to tell us that they didn't tell us? Tom, we'll start with you. What was their secret they were holding back?
If we're reaching closure, I have to do the traditional. Wisdom Weavers is available at Amazon in Kindle, paperback, and hardback. And now to answer your question. McLuhan was a compartmentalized Catholic, and so even though he went to Mass every day that he possibly could at noon and so forth and so on, he was hiding aspects of that. He talked to Mary. He would not obviously write a book about talking to Mary or give a lecture in class about talking to Mary and so forth and so on. So there's a whole part of that is hidden. And I think to the extent that Innis had a spiritual, not a religious side, he would often hold that back too. He loved to walk under the stars. He loved to identify the different trees in nature. At a certain time in the spring, he'd say, oh, the sap will be running again at the farm. That whole part of him, he didn't want to look like a hick. He wanted to be more Dean-like, although he snubbed his nose against any kind of ceremony. He loved the Marx Brothers because they too had an anarchy that kind of thumbed its nose. But at the same time, he had to increasingly in his life look more and more Dean-like, more and more professorial. And so he was hiding his great love to be natural, to be himself, to be casual, to admire everything that on a farm you can get away with talking in a very colloquial way. He couldn't talk in colloquialisms again. He had to pretend to use academic dialogue, and you'll see that in much of his correspondence and lectures. So I think those are two hidden parts of each of them.
Yeah, really good, Tom. And you wrote the book on him, and I appreciate that. But I just want Paul and Bill to know you can make this part up. You don't have to say, I can back it up with, I've studied this shit for 50 years. You can say, what do you think Marshall was hiding? What was his secret? If you want, anything you want. So Bill, you're up. What do you think?
I think he was sitting on many things that never got said. And what really added to the last 15 months of his life, when he was totally aphasic and could not speak and could not communicate in any way, was that these things were burning in him that he couldn't express, and he knew he was going to die before he would ever be able to say them. That would, if I were to write a play about McLuhan, that would be the incendiary focus of what I would try to get at dramatically. I don't know what it would be, the content of what that insight would be, but it's possible it would be something that changed the scale and scope and coloring of everything he'd said before.
Beautiful.
That's just imagined.
Yeah, there was that play on McLuhan. We went and saw that, and it felt like the Marx Brothers. I'm glad you brought them up, Tom, because the Marx Brothers were in a jam once, and they go, "We got to think," and they go, "We already tried that." Okay, Paul, any thoughts on this hidden secret idea from Thornton Wilder?
All right, I'll tell you that in a second. But first, I just have to say that apropos about what you were saying before. Back in the early 1990s, one of the first science fiction stories I ever wrote and had published, it's called Bestseller, and someone figures out a program to basically publish a short story, and it's a different story. It's the same general story, but it has different elements, a different ending for everyone who reads it, and the program investigates everyone who buys the story, so everyone thinks it's the greatest story they ever read because it corresponds to exactly what they most want in a story. But to answer your question, honestly, McLuhan, of all the people, famous and not famous, I've ever known in my life, always struck me, and thinking back on it now, I still think the same thing. He always struck me as someone who had the least to hide. I mean, maybe he was just very clever, but I think it was more than that. I think McLuhan at some point in his life made a decision along the lines of, I don't give a damn what anyone thinks. I'm going to say what I think. I'm just going to tell you as it is. And yes, he was, he understood, obviously, communication. Yes, he was in the game of being famous. He enjoyed his fame and all that stuff. But I think part of the reason that he had the impact he did was he never held back on what he was thinking. Nothing seemed irrelevant to him. Nothing seemed the wrong time to say something. So that's my answer about McLuhan. Innis, I didn't know personally, so I really can't say much about that.
It takes courage, what you just laid out there, Paul. It takes courage. There's something in these guys. My heroes, Frank Zappa, Marcel Duchamp, and Marshall McLuhan, all really are evoked when Frank was on David Letterman. He says, "I don't have any brown lipstick in my makeup kit." You know, they didn't kiss up to anybody. They just did their thing and they lived with it, you know. And I mean, this is the final round robin question. In one of these articles, brilliant reviews of your books on Tom online. There's two of them. Bill wrote one and Andre wrote one, and I'm sure there's many more podcasts. And one of them ends with this: in freeing ourselves from time and attempting a balance between the demands of time and space, we can develop conditions favorable to an interest in cultural activity. It's a little wordy, but it's basically, how do we free ourselves? What's the strategy you guys can lay out? How do we free ourselves? You know, Utah Phillips said, anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Guess what? Etymologically, the word freedom breaks down to that exact same thing. Making rules for yourself. That's what freedom means. So how do we free ourselves? Bill, we'll start with you, Paul, and then you can do the final benediction, Tom.
I think we have to learn to live without assumptions and learn to treat new phenomena with a child's openness and curiosity, and not be enslaved by precepts and received knowledge and rearview mirror thinking.
Yeah.
That's my idea of freedom.
It's beautiful. I did a lecture at the film festival once and I said percepts, and they changed the word to precepts. And I goes, no, McLuhan was about percepts, not precepts. And I always say concepts are a con job. They're trying to con you. Words evoke more in their meaning. Paul, how do we free ourselves?
For whatever reason, I think all human beings have a part of their brain which tears down what they want to do. You come up with an idea, nah, that's a stupid idea. I mean, the first time I heard my voice recorded, I felt like screaming and yelling. Who's that idiot talking? The first time I ever saw myself in a video, I felt like jumping off a bridge, you know, and that's this part of your brain that for whatever reason gainsays things that you do. So the way to free yourself is to not pay attention to that carping part of the brain. I have no idea where it came from. I have no idea really what purpose it serves. And again, I think Marshall achieved his greatness in part because he learned early on, don't pay attention to that dumb part of the brain that tells you, no, don't do this. No, that's too crazy an idea. No, no one's going to believe it. No, don't send it off to the publisher yet. You got to work on it another 10 years. All of these thoughts amount to the same thing. And I think we have to learn to disregard those negative thoughts.
Beautiful, Paul. Well put. And Tom, thanks for Wisdom Weavers and your time and energy here. It's been a delightful time for the final benediction. How do we free ourselves?
Well, first of all, both Bill and Paul have spoken for me, and many of the quotes that you've given about the arts and so forth are very liberating as well. And you've also given some quotes about thinking, and those are very liberating as well. I think freedom has many levels. The freedom from, as Sartre put, the freedom from continual habit. I'm speaking English right now rather than, in other words, I'm trapped by many systems of which are invisible. I may go to the grocery store the exact same way every day. I may have all kinds of patterns in my life that I could liberate myself from, some of which would be meaningless. You know, it may be valuable to go to the grocery store the same way, but it may also be liberating to find out what else is nearby. So freedom is at many levels, but the ultimate freedom, I think in McLuhan-Innis terms, is to know who I am beneath my programming. We live in an age where 4 years of our lives are spent as Americans and Canadians consuming advertising. And so no matter what political system we live in, and whether that's liberating or democratic or not, and no matter what system we live in regarding our religious views and so forth, many of which are also entrapping. Dogma often prevents freedom of thought. Despite all of that, in this conversation about the media, in the 15th century, most of the thought that people had was, what's for food? What are my ideals? What are my dreams? What do I want to do tomorrow? How can I survive? Dreams, nightmares, all of that was what filled consciousness. I'm going to guess at percentages here that in the 21st century, what fills consciousness is 15% advertising, 15% pornography. I'm not saying for each of you, I'm saying within this culture. 15% flash/trash for cash entertainment, 10% social media. I'm just guessing based on the research I've seen. And the fact that we spend more time with screens than with each other. All of that means that our consciousness is far more controlled than we realize. I used to take people on media fasts for that very reason. What is nature thinking? What is the universe thinking? What am I thinking that's creative? So one simple cliche there is be the creator, not the consumer. That's
Yes.
one form of liberation. Be the creator, not the consumer. But given that we've consumed so much, often against our choice, often against our better judgment, how do we see the toast that keeps popping up in our head? My mind says I'm a material girl based on Madonna putting that there, but I'm neither material nor a girl. I'm not a materialist at all. That is controlling us in many ways that we don't perceive. A huge subconscious reservoir of someone else's plastic thinking. That's a major liberation point, I think, when we're talking INNIS-MCLUHAN, and there are many others beyond that.
Really beautiful. Yeah, like what you evoked was the word media can be described as me die. Well, guess what? I think Marshall, Innis, Joyce, they all forgot to die. And that's the beauty, that we'll live in eternity. It's been a pleasure and an honor. This should become an 8-part Netflix series. If you guys are willing, let's do it. And it's really been enlightening for me. I appreciate your time and energy. And even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button now, I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever. Thank you so much, Paul, Bill, and Tom. What a pleasure.
Delightful. Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions.
We'll see you another time soon.